Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to continue answering your questions regarding the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. Let's get to it. Disappointed Margaret says, and by the way, I asked people to tell me what they wanted me to refer them as, and Margaret wanted me to refer to her as Disappointed Margaret. She says, why did you find the Hicksville owner not credible, but you found Amber Heard credible when she was shown to easily and repeatedly lie under oath about provable facts? End of question. I don't understand. Why did you find the Hicksville owner not credible? I don't remember that. Did I find the Hicksville owner not credible? He was the one talking about the sconce. I mean, I might have thrown out an hypothesis that he was potentially spinning things a little bit, but I don't know. I thought he was credible. I didn't think he had a huge reason to lie. So I don't remember concluding that the Hicksville owner was not credible. And then also, but you found Amber Heard credible when she was shown to easily lie. I also don't remember finding Amber Heard credible. I don't remember that. I mean, there were some things that she, I think, was telling the truth about. I can never know. But so maybe I'm misremembering what I was saying. It also doesn't sound like a legitimate question. It just sounds like a criticism, which is fine. All right. Moontee from Boston says, why was it very difficult for you to not believe Amber Heard, even though the evidence was proving her lies week after week? Your compassion is admirable, but it felt misplaced in this situation. You were bending yourself backwards to make it bidirectional abuse, even though the evidence never showed Johnny Depp being abusive. I felt disappointed watching your commentary on the trial. Well, Moontee, I'm, sorry I disappointed you, truly. I don't know what to say about that. I don't even necessarily have a defense against that. So if I disappointed you and I did a terrible thing, then I'm sorry. You're not characterizing how I felt. Maybe I came across this way or I literally said things along these lines, but there were times when I absolutely identified Amber Heard as probably lying. In fact, there were times when I think I flat out said that is an outright lie or she's confused or something. The picture side by side, she was claiming over and over again that they were different pictures, but it was obvious. I don't need metadata to know, or I don't even need an overlay to know that those two pictures were the same picture. One had a filter on it. Were the claims that she had been knocked into unconsciousness for several hours on 3 different occasions, and there was no evidence. In fact, she took a picture of herself and she had a bruise on her arm, but no bruising on her face. So, you all know that data. So I don't remember concluding that Amber Heard was telling the truth the whole time, which is basically what you're saying. And by the way, what Disappointed Margaret was saying. It just makes me wonder if people watched like 5 minutes where I said something along those lines and then they made a conclusion that represented the entirety of the 50 plus hours of me reacting. Anyway, and then says, you were bending yourself backwards to make it bidirectional abuse. I don't see it that way. Plus, I don't know if it was bidirectional abuse. I never concluded that I knew anything. I think in the end, I said that if I was to put my money down on, and I keep sort of emphasize, when I use the metaphor of putting my money down, in roulette, when I put my money down on red, I'm not saying I know red is going to come up. I'm saying I'm guessing that red is going to come up. And when I was saying, if I was to put my money down, I would put my money down on that Amber Heard and Johnny Depp were abusive to each other, and that Amber Heard was 70% the abuse and he was 30% or 80-20 or something like that. Maybe 60-40, probably not 60-40, at the very least 70-30. I'm putting my money down on that. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that's my guess. And clearly, a lot of people have other guesses, including the same guess that I have, but many people will say, no, it was this, no, it was that. All of us are guessing. We are putting our money down. None of us, when people play roulette, no one knows where the ball is going to land. We're all guessing because we don't know. We weren't there. It's not a great analogy because it has to do with something that will happen in the future, but none of us were there. And if you look at it a certain way, anyway, I've been over it. But I do want to say that I get it. If I were to watch a channel and I was passionate about something and the individual on the YouTube channel was contradicting something that I believed, then yeah, I guess I would be disappointed too. But I guess in my best moments, I would try to recognize that there's a plurality of opinions, and especially about something like this. I'm not ruining anyone's life by having a reaction, in the same way that you're not ruining my life by concluding something completely different from me on this, right? So, but I get it that it's disappointing. Patron Robot Snot from Toronto says, it would have been interesting to see a trial with equally matched law teams. It sometimes felt like the trial was scripted by Monty Python. I have no questions, actually. I just want to thank you for persevering through this tedious trial. Cheers. Dessa from Canada says, since the trial began, I have heard horrible statements about Amber Heard from some of the most compassionate people that I know. Some of their opinions of Amber Heard seem so inhumane to me. I've said openly in the staff room that I do not agree with her actions or the abuse she inflicted on Johnny. I believe that all abusers should face consequences for their actions and that they should be held accountable for the pain they cause. But I also believe that no one deserves to be told things like, they are human garbage that should have never been born. People saying that about Amber Heard. I have said I think the hate she has gotten could drive anyone to suicide, and that we should try to encourage people to seek help to change their abusive behaviors, not shame them into more anger and more violence. When I say this to people, they just stare at me like I have two heads. Is it wrong for me to feel this way? Because I always seem to be the only one that does feel this way. Also, how can such kind people be so hateful? End of question. Yeah, I could relate. I not only experienced this through the trial, not necessarily with people around me. I mean, most of the people around me, they didn't know anything about it. Most of the people around me. But in terms of on the internet, there was a lot of hatred. And other YouTube channels I thought were being snarky and sometimes hurtful with this kind of a language. Now, if you believe that she is a horrible person who has done horrible things, then, some criticism along those lines is perhaps justified for some people. But yeah, when you go really far, and it doesn't take long before you can hear these kinds of statements, that she's human garbage that should never have been born. It's just like, whoa, people, I don't know if we want to go there. And plus, aren't you now part of the verbal abusive group of people? You think she's horrible for being abusive and harmful to other people, and that somehow justifies you. There's some people that Ted Bundy, Charlie Manson, these kinds of people, fine, just go after him. But I don't know if Amber Heard really qualifies in this instance. Plus, when you consider the trauma that she went through, the condition that she might suffer from that might have a lot to do with her issues, it's just it doesn't exonerate her, but it's just I don't know, just pump the brakes a little bit. And I get that. But I've run into this throughout my entire career for borderline personality disorder in particular, but a lot of issues. But I'll be in a consultation room with other therapists, and the way that some people, if not kind of the majority of people who don't specialize in borderline, the way they talk about people with borderline, it's horrendous. And there were times when I didn't have any power in the room, or even the supervisor, the boss, was saying similar things, and I wanted to say something, but I couldn't because I felt I might get fired or ostracized or something. When I'm in power, I will come down on people, and people know when they're around me that they shouldn't have that, or I'll try to re-educate them around borderline and the stigma around it so that people don't talk that way. Now, I don't know if Amber Heard has borderline, but I'm just using this as an example of the way people talk about people with borderline. I'm just like, whoa. So yeah, I've run into this in a number of ways, and I've probably fallen prey to it at times. I'm sure I have. I don't have an example off the top of my head. And the more and more I watch our behavior, in particular when I react to reality TV shows, the general consensus is that it's okay to just bully these people, not only in comments, but also going after them in the DMs. And so I've started to notice that there's a lot of closeted bullies, or the default for human beings is to be a bully, and we just refrain from bullying others when we're in public or we're worried that other people might consequence us. But we're online, so much bullying is happening. If you have a lot of latent anger, which clearly a lot of people have, then you will use that opportunity to exercise that, to express that. And there's a lot of people who have been harmed, a lot of people who have been traumatized, a lot of people who have been bullied, and they have yet to recover from that. And it all comes pouring out in events like this, because bullies, for all of us, like I was saying earlier, in terms of we are constantly being affected by the herd mentality, the groupthink, that and this happens on the playground and it happens online. When someone is identified as a victim, as an easy victim, as a moral victim, meaning that people will feel moral in attacking that victim. And that's how people felt about it. It's like, Johnny Depp is this. It's moral for us to get together and attack him. Amber Heard is this. It's moral for us to get together. Now, whether that's an active organization, it usually isn't. Sometimes it is. But usually it's like people notice like, oh, people are going after Amber Heard. I have a lot of latent anger, and it feels kind of righteous to actually attack her. And so I'm going to let out all of my anger, and because I got a lot. And of course, this happened to me. I was the target, a much smaller target than Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, but people would attack me in a way along these lines, right? So, or when people bullied Dr. Spiegel or Dr. Hughes, this kind of stuff, it's like it emerges socially. So when, for example, when Dr. Spiegel gets on the stand, he starts to give his testimony. In the beginning, I'm quite positive that you would hear people more on the fence, more like, is this guy for real? I wonder what's going on here. But over time, because of groupthink and systems, over time, the online consensus, particularly in certain echo chambers, is, okay, he's a joke, and he is ridiculous, and he's stupid, and he's lying, and we all hate him. And yeah, we hate him. And then that grows, and then it all of that inside latent anger is like, okay, here's a perfect chance to let it out. Let's go after him. Let's mob review his websites, and we're going to get him, and we're going to post things, and we're going to make fun of him. We're going to compare him to Gollum. We're going to compare him to Smeagol. We're going to ridicule him, and We're going to try to get his license revoked. You know, it grows into that, I think, because there's a lot of hurting people that have yet to recover. And that's the other thing to remind ourselves about, is that when we look at other people, we have to remember that there's a lot of people, if not the majority of people, who have been mistreated growing up and are still trying to recover from that. They're suffering. People are walking around going to work. They look like they're fine, and they are fine. They're still good. They're good people, but there's a lot of trauma. Clearly, right? And this trial illuminates that. You know, you look at Johnny Depp, you look at Amber Heard prior to any of this information coming out, you're just like, oh, they're a beautiful couple. Everything's going well for them. I'm sure their lives are great. And then you hear about it, you're like, whoa. And there's a lot of situations like that. Your best friends might be dealing with stuff like that. So it makes sense that there are going to be social elements that reflect the fact that people have a lot of unresolved issues. And I hope that people can get the help that they deserve. I'm taking a long time with each questions, and there's a lot of questions, so I need to go faster. Molly from Philadelphia says, what testimony was most compelling to you? Yeah, that's a good question, because we asked that of the attorneys, right? For me, I would say that their audio recordings were very compelling. The testimony by Amber Heard, particularly about the 3 incidents of abuse in which she describes extreme, long-lasting, several minutes, maybe as long as an hour, of repeated blows being thrown around, breaking things, and beaten into unconsciousness for several hours, and the pictures just not reflecting that story at all. As I said throughout the reaction video series I made, it could be all true. I wasn't there, I don't know, but given all the evidence of those incidents, because those are the main foundation of the allegations, were those 3 incidents, and the evidence just wasn't there. In fact, there was a lot of evidence that was contradictory to that. Without that fact, without that testimony, say if Amber, and I said this during the videos, is that if Amber Heard had come out and said, look, he hit me a few times, and that's why I have this minor bruise, the 2 pictures with the filter. It's a bruise, but it doesn't reflect being repeatedly beaten with hands with rings over and over, unconscious. So that testimony to me was the heart of the whole matter, right? Everything else was kind of secondary to that. And then the audio recordings was a large part of bolstering all those ideas. And then also the couples therapist testimony, that therapist wasn't beholden to either side and was very clear and was very adamant that Amber Heard was the aggressor. She didn't know and didn't claim that there was violence, but in session, she saw Amber Heard berating him and heard that Amber Heard had said that she took pride in being able to provoke him or get him to be in a fight, and that I can't remember exact words. But all the other testimony to me was interesting, and some of it seemed more credible than others, but it was all background to that, and some of it seemed like, well, we don't really know, right? Because that's Amber Heard's friend or that's Johnny Depp's employee, and they're saying opposite stories. Could we imagine that they're motivated by the fact that that's their friend or that's their boss? And so it threw all the other testimony into question, even Dr. Curry, Dr. Hughes, right? You clearly see, okay, well, you're working for that team. You're clearly biased on that side, or they found a biased person that would provide them with the exact psychological evaluation and report that they're looking for. So, that kind of testimony was interesting for sure. But when you hear the audio, you hear Amber Heard describing what happened to her, you hear the witness accounts, you look at the pictures, and I've said this a number of times, but whenever I think about this, I think what happened, who knows, is that in 2016, when she was making the initial allegations against him, she knowingly exaggerated, or for some reason exaggerated what happened greatly. She greatly exaggerated, not realizing that that was going to bite her in the ass later on. She just said things, maybe she's used to just exaggerating or spinning things greatly, but she didn't think, or she didn't have good counsel, and then had to stick to that exaggeration later, even though there was no evidence to back it up. And it's kind of a shame if you're pro Amber Heard, because there's a possibility that there's a real story of abuse from Johnny Depp to her, but because she was locked in on a previous exaggeration, her entire testimony was disregarded by people, the jury, and many people in the public. Just imagine if her story actually did match the pictures that were presented. And then she talked about how intoxicated he would become and how delusional he would become and was sexually aggressive at times. It would be much easier to believe, right? And so there's a possibility that that is what happened, but because of those exaggerations and because of some personality issues that she has, that it just made it look so ridiculous to so many people. Now, again, I want to remind the pro Johnny Depp people, I'm not saying that any of her allegations are true. I'm just saying it's possible. Listener Ben says, my boyfriend has hit me twice and I'm afraid to tell anyone. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't want him to get in trouble. He says he doesn't want to do it again. Is there something I can do to help him? End of question. Well, listener Ben, I'm sorry that you're going through that. That sounds difficult because on one hand, you're being abused and hit by your partner. That is scary and concerning and painful, physically and emotionally. But on the other hand, you don't want to lose your partner, and you love your partner, and you believe your partner is remorseful and doesn't want to do it again. So a lot of intimate partner violence falls into this category. I don't know the percentage, but a lot. And I've treated a lot of people in this category. And what you want to do is you want to find a specialist. What you don't want to do is do nothing. Because if you do nothing, if you and your boyfriend do nothing, chances are it's just going to get worse, and it'll start affecting your mind. You'll start to become gaslit more, and before you know it, you're in a full-blown abusive relationship, or at least more abusive than now, and you believe you deserve it, or you believe everything is normal. The beginnings of that is happening right now to you. You're already saying to yourself, well, he hit me twice, but I don't think he's a bad person. And that's a fallacy, that somehow people who abuse are bad people. And that's the way people are talking about Amber Heard, right? People who abuse in general are not bad people. They are good people. They have redeeming qualities. And in fact, some abusive people are very, very lovely, very, very nice, very, very empathic, compassionate people, and yet they get triggered and they get abusive. So don't believe that because you like him and he's good, that means that he's not being abusive, because he has hit you twice out of anger, which is abusive. Flat out. And most people don't do that kind of stuff. So there's something different about him that is concerning on a number of levels. That doesn't mean you break up with him. You could if you want to, obviously. But it also doesn't mean that you're just sort of like, well, he's a good person, it'll work out, because it doesn't usually. So he could get treatment. That would be the number one recommendation I would have. Someone that specializes in treating perpetrators and mild perpetrators. All right, anonymous listener says, are you ever going to go back and do speculative psychoanalysis of fictional characters like you did in the early days, like the Game of Thrones characters, the Star Wars characters. I miss those. I thought those were very interesting. I just want to tell you that too. Thank you. Yeah, I miss those too. There's been too many other things to get to, I guess. Plus, a lot of people didn't really watch those episodes. But yeah, I mean, they're fun because it's, a chance to nerd out on something. Zoe from the DR says, it is clear to me that the PAI is more susceptible to malingering, but is it ever considered that since the MMPI must be heavily adapted to every country's culture, people who are out of touch with the country's mainstream culture may be susceptible to misinterpretation? Given that most celebrities probably are out of touch, wouldn't that be a factor to consider? Yeah, this is a great question, Zoe. And I don't know any research on famous people or celebrities and how their responses might be skewed on the MMPI or PAI. But it is a good point that when we are looking at the results of the PAI, MMPI, any test, any psychometric test, that culture plays a big role. For example, with the IQ test, it was normed originally with all white people. And when they started to administer the test to non-white people, on average, those non-white people scored lower. And at first, it was like, well, it's because those are brown people and they're dumber. I mean, that was literally the conclusion. Many years ago. But over time, we started thinking, well, but they grow up in a different system, in a different culture with different understandings, with different language, with different associations with things. And so you have to norm it on a wide variety of people or have it normed on different demographic groups to know what the results mean. And so, it is a good point, but I don't know if it applies to celebrities. I just have to see the research. Helena C says, I have to wonder if you have any notion how biased you came across against people with addictions. How come Amber Heard's behavior is always explained and or minimized or brushed off because of her conditions? Are there first and second class mental diseases in patients? Really unsettling, Helena C says. Well, again, I'm sorry for disappointing you, Helena. It sounds like you felt that I was saying that people with addictions are suffering from a second class mental disease, and my hands sweat just reading your comment. So, I'll take your word for it, and if I did that, then I'm sorry. There is a lot of bias against people with addictions for sure. I can't really think of anything that I said that would coincide with that, but I talked for over 50 hours, so maybe I did say something. I'm guessing I did. Could you provide a quote or a timestamp so I can be like, oh, yeah, that is bad, but to just kind of blanketly say that I was being biased against people with addictions. That's literally, have you ever wondered how biased you came across against people with addictions? People with addictions, I was biased? I was talking about Johnny Depp. I was talking about everyone and the substances they were using. I was saying that Johnny Depp had a lot of use and there was hard evidence of that, even his own account and his friend's account. I was saying that people who use certain drugs can be delusional at times and could forget things that also could affect their brain. All that's scientifically based. So I don't know. Are people thinking that I'm biased against Johnny Depp in general and I'm just using his addiction issue as some way of discounting his testimony or something? I don't know. But it's unsettling to me that you're unsettled, Helena. Listener Emma from Sweden says, did you listen to all the testimony supporting Amber's story? Her sister, the friends of both her and Johnny, her makeup artist, etc.? End of question. So, yeah, I believe I reacted to it and summarized it. This is another question that sounds like a statement, right? Did you listen to all the testimony supporting Amber's story? So if you're genuinely curious, the answer is yes. If you're trying to say something like I discounted her, you see what I'm dealing with. I'm not, I could be reading into it. I probably am. But at the very least, I'll tell you, pro Amber Heard people will be saying like, did you even listen to her testimony? You're an idiot. And then pro Johnny Depp people, how come you're just discounting him because he has an addiction? I'm just like, so am I doing all these things or none of these things or some of these things? Like, I don't know what's happening. As a person who is actually trying to make a positive difference in the world, to have people claim that I'm actually harming society, I have to tell you, is very distressing to me. It's completely antithetical. And I know a lot of you people were saying otherwise, which I needed to hear and still do to some extent. But I don't feel good about even the fact that people even if they're mishearing what I'm saying or they took something out of context or something, it still doesn't make me feel good, you know? And I'll tell you, and I've said this from the beginning, that I have this impulse to just be like, yeah, let's just not do these kinds of things anymore. Because, you know, people often say, if my YouTube channel saves one person's life, then it makes it all worth it. And that's true. And it's a good, noble sentiment. But on the flip side, if I ruin one person's life, then the whole thing should be shut down. I mean, I know that's not rational, but that's kind of how I feel at times. And so even if I'm helping or I'm neutral to a lot of people, but there are a set of people that are harmed, it's just like, maybe I should just stop doing this. I don't think I will stop doing it, but Listen Meow Meow says, does this verdict set a dangerous precedent? Does the verdict set a dangerous precedent? Well, according to attorneys, no, because civil cases aren't precedential, right? But it might reflect a shift in our culture regarding our understanding of IPV and gender, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. But I can absolutely see this, and I already kind of see it, this case being used as further motivation or reasoning or data or justification to discount women who step forward, which is a very unfortunate effect of this trial. Listener Aaliyah says, hypothetically, and not directly related to the trial, if a personality disorder is severe enough, could that reduce someone's criminal charge, similar to pleading insane at the time of the crime? End of question. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, and it's been a while since I've done forensic psychology, which does involve obviously a lot of pleading insanity at the time of the crime and other kinds of legal arguments that one makes in terms of capacity, diminished capacity, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm not super up to date. Plus, every state is different and the laws are constantly changing. But I've never heard of anyone using a personality disorder as an insanity defense. Usually, it's disorders involving psychosis, like schizophrenia, this kind of thing. And I think there are state laws prohibiting the use of a personality disorder in an insanity defense. I think that there have been times when it was used successfully, and then there was legislation to counter that and say, no more of that. You can't use personality disorders in that way. But I think it could be used as proof to demonstrate that the individual was distorted to an extent that it would affect their ability to tell right from wrong, or did compel them to do something in the moment that interfered with their decision making. It would have to be case-by-case basis, but I could see that being included. For example, if someone had committed a crime, say because they are borderline and they were highly triggered and they were raised in a family in which there was a lot of violence, they were violent with their partner to the degree that they end up being convicted and put into prison for a while. Well, with that person, because I believe, and most people believe, that incarceration, prison sentences are for rehabilitation, and instead of punishing someone, right, more as a moral punishment, like you did something wrong and you deserve this amount of time out. Instead, I would hope that what we really want is to not have these crimes happen again. And if we can do something that can eliminate the risk of that person committing those kinds of crimes in the future, then we should do that. And when we have sufficiently done that procedure and we're pretty sure that the individual isn't going to commit that crime again, then we should release them, because, that's, to me, what's fair. And so if someone was suffering from a personality disorder that, combined with other kinds of things, resulted in them committing a crime, and then they go to prison and they get treatment for that personality disorder, it could take a long time. I mean, personality disorders tend to take years and years to recover from sufficiently. But they do that. Let's say the person had a life sentence, but after 25 years, they go through enough treatment where it's pretty sure that the individual has a lot of tools, a lot of insight, a lot of recovery from trauma, such that they are not likely to be triggered. They're not likely to believe those kinds of things in terms of a solution to their triggers, and they're not likely to be violent with people in the future. Then could we argue that because of the personality disorder was a major factor and now it's been treated behind bars, that the sentence should be reduced and the person should be released? I would stand by that. I think other people wouldn't, but that's just one example. The conditions that are considered to be valid as an argument for insanity at the time of the crime are very severe. People who are experiencing high-level psychosis, meaning that they absolutely believe that their brother is the devil and the president is in their head telling them that they have to kill their brother, and they kind of have a battle within themselves like, well, I don't want to, but the president is telling me, and this would be a good thing, and if I kill that person, my brother will be brought back to life. People have these kinds of delusions, and if you could demonstrate that sufficiently, then obviously they didn't know the difference between right and wrong. They didn't really know what they were doing, and thus the question of intent regarding the crime is heavily contextualized by that mental disorder. Now, there's a myth out there that individuals like this, if they have an insanity defense, that they're let off scot-free. That is not the case. What happens is they don't go into a prison, but they go into a locked mental facility. Essentially, it's a prison, but it's a mental health inpatient treatment center, and they are in there indefinitely, usually until the psychiatric team determines that the individual is safe enough to be released into the public. And sometimes, not always obviously, the individual is never found to be safe to return to the public. And in my experience, anecdotally, psychiatric teams are very careful about releasing people. In fact, they might be a little too careful about it. So someone commits a crime where if they weren't found to be insane at the time of the crime, the sentence would be 7 years. But because they're found insane at the time of the crime and the psychiatric team is not comfortable releasing them, they might be in the hospital for 35 years. So we just have to remember that being found insane at the time of crime isn't some get out of jail free card. In fact, sometimes it means you're in jail. Essentially, you're incarcerated for a much longer period of time. Having said that, some people have very temporary psychosis, and a very small percentage of those people might commit some sort of crime that will result in them being incarcerated for a certain amount of time. But when we determine that this person was insane at the time of crime, we give them proper treatment, we get them on medication, we monitor them to make sure that they continue to take that medication and that they stay in touch with people to monitor if their symptoms are coming up. And we can find that those people do fine. They just didn't have the treatment available to them, or something happened and something went a little wrong, but on the medication, they're fine. And they never have psychosis again. Again, there's monitoring. It's not like we just release them into the population. There's a lot of monitoring. And as soon as they go off their meds, or as soon as they don't show up to a psychiatric appointment, there's a call and the police will arrive and say what's going on. And, there's a response. So, and that mitigates because usually there's a ramp up to symptoms that will result in the possibility of those kinds of things. And by the way, I want to point out that there's a huge myth that somehow psychosis equals crimes and violence, and this is just not the case. The vast, vast majority of violent crimes are committed by people who are not suffering from a mental disorder. And listen to my whole deep dive on that with that, mental illness and violence, I think is what it's called. I'd go over all the research, and there's a lot of myths and going both ways. Anyway, all right, well, that does it for that episode. I think I'll just pause there and pick up later where I left off. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.